We'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for a discussion on Ghana's upcoming elections, challenges, and opportunities. My name is Christopher O'Connor, and I am the program officer here for the West Africa program at the National Endowment for Democracy. NED is a private nonprofit foundation dedicated to the growth and strengthening of democratic institutions across the world. Each year, NED makes more than 1,200 grants to support the projects of non-governmental groups who are working for democratic goals in more than 90 countries. Since 1991, when NED made its first grant to the Institute for Economic Affairs, NED has been supporting civil society activists working to strengthen democracy in Ghana. Grants to organizations such as the Institute for Economic Affairs and others, including the Ghana Committee on Human and People's Rights, the Center for International Private Enterprise, the National Democratic Institute, and the International Republican Institute, have supported presidential debates, civic education, women's political participation, and election monitoring. Through this support, NED has modestly contributed to Ghana's transformation from a one-party dictatorship under Jerry Rawlings to a shining star of democracy in Africa. For this very reason, NED stopped making grants to civil society groups in Ghana. However, in light of previous competitive elections, heightened political tensions, and disagreements over electoral reforms, NED is currently supporting a package of short-term election programs aimed at sustaining and expanding Ghana's democratic leadership in Africa. 2016 marks the highest level of funding NED has ever contributed to Ghana, but this commitment is as much a reflection of our commitment to democratic solidarity in the region as it is a commitment to improving the electoral mechanisms of Ghana. A vibrant democratic Ghana goes a long way to advance a vibrant democratic Africa. NED is currently supporting both domestic and international groups to monitor the elections, to conduct public confidence surveys on the electoral mechanisms, to mobilize women and youth to vote, to promote peace messaging, and to combat hate speech. It is now my pleasure to introduce our partners and panelists. To my immediate right is John Tomaszewski, also known as JT, the Regional Director for Africa at the International Republican Institute. In this capacity, he leads and provides overall strategic guidance for IRI democracy and governance programs throughout sub-Saharan Africa. A political parties and democratic governance specialist, JT participated in numerous election observation missions and program assessments, including in Burundi, Egypt, Ghana, Nigeria, Rwanda, Somaliland, Tanzania, and Uganda. He has also spent nearly 5 years as a public affairs and legislative policy professional with 2 members of Congress, U.S. Representative Kirk Weldon and U.S. Representative Gus Bilirakis. Sitting next to him is Dr. Patrick Merloe, who is the Director of Electoral Programs and a Senior Associate at the National Democratic Institute. He has over 30 years of experience in promoting citizen empowerment, government accountability, public policy, advocacy, and electoral integrity. He has participated in over 150 international missions for NDI to more than 65 countries. And to his right is Professor Gyimah-Boadi, the Executive Director of the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, an independent, nonpartisan, and nonprofit policy research and advocacy organization dedicated to the promotion of democracy, good governance, and economic opportunity in Ghana and Africa. All 3 organizations are receiving support from the National Endowment for Democracy to strengthen Ghana's electoral processes and ensure peaceful and credible elections. In a moment, I would like to turn the floor over to Professor Gyimah-Boadi to present the findings of CDD-Ghana's Prospects for Peaceful and Credible Elections before hearing from JT and Pat about NDI and IRI's recent pre-election assessment mission and their ongoing activities to strengthen democracy in Ghana. After that, we will quickly open for questions and answers.
this project of trying to ensure that Ghana's latest elections stay on a good record track. And always glad to be back here, a long friend and associate of the NED, and so it's always a nice thing for me to be back. I will start my, I'll begin by presenting to you just a brief sketch and a political context of the Ghana elections and why it became necessary, or we thought it was important to do a pre-election survey, something that we didn't do for the previous elections. So let's get into that. And I think the best way to describe the Ghana election, the political context, is that in many ways, it looks familiar, but it's unfamiliar, that we are in a new bit of an unfamiliar terrain so far as elections in Ghana's Fourth Republic are concerned. And the first to note is that it has been the case in the Fourth Republic of Ghana, as it is elsewhere in Africa, that elections serve as a proxy war for those seeking to capture state resources. And for Ghana today, those resources include oil and gas resources. The second is that Ghanaians seem to, the idea of presidential term limits is sort of become internalized among Ghanaians, that every president serves 2 terms. But then we have an unusual situation on our hands this year because the President Mahama has done only 1 term. And so naturally expects and is expected to do a 2nd term. But his party, the ruling party, has done 2 terms. And so that brings a certain kind of a disorientation in the minds of many of us who are trying to figure out whether it's time to have a change of guard or not to have a change of guard. Then also, we have to factor in the fact that relations between the ruling NDC and the main opposition MPP, which have never been cozy anyway, have become even worse, and especially since 2012 and the disputed election results and the 8-month Supreme Court litigation over the outcome of the presidential polls. Then you also have an administration of President Mahama and the NDC that is dogged by severe economic management challenges, at least challenges under his watch, whether of his own making or not, and also considerable public dissatisfaction with economic conditions and social development conditions in the country. And that has come with a lot of labor unrest. Just about every profession labor group has gone on strike in the last 4 years or so, and there are still, when I was leaving, the medical lab people were, workers were also on strike. And local government and civil servants have been on strike for several weeks prior to that. Then also, you've got a government that has been dogged by allegations of serious corruption, graft, and many scandals. Most of them don't make the international news because we've got Nigeria and others to cover us. But at least some of you would have heard of Ghana's debacle in the World Cup in Brazil and the transfer of money by aircraft, by plane to Brazil to go and shout. If I saw this story, it would take a long time to tell you all that is there to be known about it beyond what was carried in the international media. Then there is a lot of concern and some outrage among the public about the failure of the Mahama administration to arrest corruption or even to pursue credible investigations, let alone serious efforts to recover state funds that are lost through corruption. But Ghana does have a history of post-regime vindictiveness. Both the NDC and MPP, upon winning elections, have behaved as if a coup d'etat had taken place, rascals had been thrown out, and had dealt with their predecessors in a fairly nasty manner. And so for the Mohammed DC administration, it's not just fear of losing power, but it's also fear of losing power and maybe changing guard from your ministerial housing to prison. And that, again, has its own dynamism, where it creates an unusual degree of unwillingness to lose power, unwillingness, and also an inclination and a willingness to abuse incumbency, and to do so, if it means buying votes, you do. You throw money at the elections, as happened plenty in the 2012 polls, and also that you try to manipulate the state security structures for political advantage. And if it means not liberalizing political control or relaxing political control over the military and security apparatus, that's what you do. And there's a lot of that going on right now. For all of this, you think the main opposition party does have a good chance. Maybe it does, but the fact remains that it is racked by internal disorganization, reflected, among other things, in the fact that the party's national chairman and general secretary have been suspended indefinitely for over a year now, and at least the party chairman suspended is still fighting his case through the courts. So just last week, the court threw the case that the party former chairman had filed out. Well, he's appealed, and he's being encouraged to do so also by the opposition, by the ruling party. So it's all murky. The party has suffered some reputation damage. It used to have a good reputation as a non-violence party, the party of liberal Democrats, the ones who could claim that they were the promoters and the avatars of democracy in Ghana. But in the last few years, it's also shown a very unfortunate violent side, one which led to the death via acid attack of one of his regional chairmen. And it's also a matter that is still in the court. And anytime it comes up in the media, it reminds people again, and it provides ammunition for its opponents to campaign against it as the party of violence. And it's in a very weak financial position, having been out of office for now nearly 8 years, and therefore being deprived of the same source that all ruling parties in Africa get their monies from. The party also suffers weakness in terms of its appeal to the Volta region of Ghana particularly, and parts of northern Ghana. All of that aside, I think it's a problem for the party that its rank and file only blame the alleged rigging and intimidation by the NDC as the main reasons why it lost in the 2 previous elections, something that means a complete displacement of its own responsibility in anything that has happened to it that is negative, and one that also creates unrealistic expectations that somehow, once you overcome rigging and intimidation, you can win. And that means a whole lot of high-strung attitudes and postures in this electoral cycle, and something that gets the backs of Ghanaians up, because as you see very soon, Ghanaians are upset about any threat of violence or anything disturbing. Ghanaian psychology doesn't take it well. For all of these reasons, and given the intensely high stakes of the election, both parties, the main opposition and the ruling party, are deploying the dark political arts, negative campaigning, unleashing agent provocateurs against each other, engaging in ethnic campaigning, and also mobilizing militia and other instruments of violence in case they needed them to press their case. There is, and on, but perhaps I think you get the picture about the stakes for the two leading parties in the election. Then what the institutions for managing the elections and the processes. You've got continuing questions about the integrity of the voter register. You've got gaps in the Electoral Commission's professionalism and integrity. You've got a great deal of trust gap, and we'll see some of them in the pre-election survey findings shortly. And also some trust gaps for the judiciary, gaps in the professionalism of the media as well as its integrity. Then always for Ghana, the mediatory sector, the institutions and the actors that do mediation, domestic civil society and international actors, the NDIs and the IRIs and others matter. But those sectors too have become weakened. First, for those of us in civil society and the quasi-state institutions, our effectiveness, our ability to intervene effectively has been, the space itself is contracted, our ability to intervene has been constricted by the fact that we are constantly labeled as partisan. And when that has been going on for 7 years or 8 years, it begins to have some sort of confusing effect on the minds of the public. If you ask me, there are some slides I'll show you. There's some information I'm going to give you here from the survey, which we haven't given to our competitors in Ghana for the very reason that it will feed in, we will be attacked viciously for being partisan, being stooges or some of the opposition party or parties. The second, so we are weakened for that reason. There's also a decline in the Western donor G7 influence on Ghana and on Ghanaian government, for the obvious reason that we now have China, we have Brazil, we have Turkey, and we have other sources of partnerships and markets. And also the Ghanaian government, the Ghanaian state has become so collaterable, and it finds it so easy to borrow on the international market that between 2008 and now, we have borrowed far more money than we did in all the period after independence. Peace campaigns have intensified. That's peace campaigns by domestic civil society and by international democracy and peace-promoting bodies ahead of this election. But in my view, they are not adequately balanced by a focus on election transparency and fairness. And so in the end, they all become preachy. As civil society, given the circumstances that I've described to you, we find it easier to do what preachers do, and that is to preach peace and to preach that things go well, but not what social scientists do, which is to analyze and to prescribe accordingly. So on the basis of all of this, the center, our center, Ghana Center for Democratic Development, thought it would be useful to conduct a pre-election survey to take a measure of levels of public expectations and anxieties about elections, and also state of preparedness of the election management institutions, state institutions, civil society bodies as well, and then to get a sense of if there is going to be trouble, from where would it come? If it's possible to capture that. And that's what we set out to do. And as I said, we're fortunate that when we reach out to the National Endowment for Democracy, it did it listened to us, and then it helped to make funding possible from itself and then through other agencies as well. So we thank you very much for that, NED. So we now get into the highlights of the survey, and I'm just going to present to you perhaps maybe a fourth or less of what we were able to capture, and they've been selected for their relevance to the theme of this, which is prospects for election credibility and peacefulness as gleaned from the pre-election surveys. So first, majorities of Ghanaians offer very negative evaluations of national, economic, and personal living conditions. They grade the government in negative terms across a wide range of macroeconomic indicators, narrowing income gaps, keeping prices down, and the like. They rate government performance low in the delivery of social and economic goods. Reliable electricity leads the pack. Combating corruption, ensuring there's enough food to eat for everyone, and the like. But nonetheless, the population is quite optimistic about the prospect of improvement a year from now. By the way, that has been a standard response. We asked this question, we asked it on all Afrobarometer surveys in Ghana. There's always a great deal of economic optimism despite the appearance of it. But I still think it's good because if you compare levels of economic optimism in 2014, the last time we did Afrobarometer for Ghana, the levels of optimism are even higher in 2016 than it was at the time. And the same holds for the other economic management performance indicators, government economic management performance indicators for the Mahama administration are much improved over what they were in 2014. Then we ask people to indicate what policy problem, what policy issue they want the current election campaign and parties and candidates to address. And they place unemployment, electricity, and education on top. This is asked unprompted. So they indicate what's on top of their minds. And they said it's electricity, it's education, it's unemployment, electricity, and education. When you ask them, how well do you think the government is doing in addressing the problem that you think is most important to you, they are negative in their view, and they think that the government is not doing much to solve these three problems that they highlight as key to them. And then we ask them, well, to what extent would the following factors influence your choice of party and candidates? They give various, but generally, large majorities say bad roads will matter to them, government corruption will matter to them, power outages will matter to them. Then we try to track the mood of the country, just broadly going into the polls, and 7 in 10 Ghanaians believe that the country is going in the wrong direction, as compared to a quarter that thinks the country is headed in the right direction. But here again, if you do a comparison over time, that's between 2014 and 2016, that sense that the country is going in the wrong direction has gone down somewhat, because in 2016, I think 8 in 10 Ghanaians thought the country was going in the wrong direction. Here are some of the charts reflecting that. I'll just flip through them. quickly and then get to the next point. Then we also asked them to give an assessment of the job performance of the president and the MPs, the members of parliament. And nearly half expressed approval of the president's performance. And nearly half also think the president's performance is poor. Again, the president's performance rating this year or in this survey is much better than it was for the president in 2014. And I sort of keep stressing this because it tells you also something about the fact that things are generally improving on the economic and social development front for the country today than what it was in 2014, even if it may be improving too late for the administration or not enough for them to get the credit in elections. Then we asked them whether they think another party will do a better job. If they don't think the government of the day is doing a good job, whether another party will do it. And they say yes. A narrow majority believe that another party will do better. Then you ask them which party, a plurality say that the MPP will do better. The main opposition MPP will do better. Now we turn to Ghanaian opinions on elections and matters to do with this election. Just in general, Ghanaians are big believers in the ballot box as the sole legitimate mechanism for choosing governments. They also believe that their vote matters, and they believe that elections in Ghana are generally effective in removing non-performing leaders. And that's easy to understand for a country that has had 2 electoral turnovers in 20 years or so. We now look at assessments of we now look to an assessment of the preparedness of the nation, and we start with preparedness of citizens for the election, for the upcoming election. Well, they show a lot of awareness of the elections. Many claim awareness of the polling station, where the location of the station where they will be expected to vote. I kind of find this finding fishy because we don't, at the present time, exactly know where all the polling stations will be. There were 22,000 polling stations in 2012. There are going to be 29,000 of them. So at least there are 7,000 locations we don't know. How that many people thought they knew where these places are, it's itself interesting. But it tells you that whether baseless or not, people are quite confident that they know what they are doing in this election. About close to half say that they've been following the election campaign and other things quite closely. Maybe it should be more than this, but I think that since we did the survey in July of this year, several months before the election, that level of awareness and following the election processes was good enough. But it also tells you it's a lot more voter education and civic education to be done. We asked them about their sources of information, and many get their information from private radio, from radio in general, from television, government and private television, but substantially also from neighbors and co-workers, family members, informal sources. And when it comes to the most important formal source, the Electoral Commission or the National Commission on Civic Education, and then those of us, civil society, organizations that see ourselves as voter educators and so on, we don't rank high on the minds of the public, I'm ashamed to say. 9 in 10 of our respondents said they were registered to vote. Again, take it with a pinch of salt, because that means compared to 2012, there's a huge jump. Where did they come from? How should it be so? We don't know. And then they express a clear intention to vote in the coming elections. So, and that's 76% of the voter population of Ghana. We also try to track the preparedness of state, non-state, and quasi-state institutions. And here, strangely, the Ghanaians think the army and the police are the most prepared of state institutions. In fact, better prepared, or more people see them as prepared compared to the the percentages that see that the Electoral Commission is prepared, or the National Peace Council is prepared, and the others. And again, election watchdog groups such as CDD-Ghana, Coalition of Domestic Election Observers, and others, we were not deemed prepared by the public. Then we track levels of public confidence in the credibility and peacefulness of the election process, upcoming election, and all. And we found something that on the face of it, Ghanaians put a lot of stock on having elections that will be free and fair. And we asked this in a certain way. We asked them, well, would you prefer to have an election that is free and fair, even if your candidate or party fails to win? And 8 in 10 said yes. But we also take note that a not minuscule 16% of the population prefer that their candidates win, even if the elections were not free and fair. And we will mark this space and come to this later, because when you do this disaggregation into which respondent is holding a view like that, then it also means it gives you cause you have to pause and then worry about the implications of that. Again, also, Ghanaians say they prefer an election that is entirely peaceful, even if it's not completely free and fair, which should tell you something about why those of us in civil society and doing election peace education have become such big champions of peaceful election, and less so in our focus on fair and transparent elections. But again, it's noticeable that a quarter of the population hold the contrary view. And again, it will be interesting to disaggregate which quarter of the population holds such views. Altogether, the public is optimistic about the credibility of the election, and close to 80% believe that the elections will be completely free and fair, or free and fair with minor problems. But there are also election integrity and peacefulness gap. And we start from what people told us about, what respondents said about their experience and their perceptions of past elections. Then we look at their experiences and perceptions of aspects of the election processes that have already taken place. About half of the respondents say they believe parties and candidates ignore electoral laws. About half, again, believe that political parties engage in violence during elections. And about 3 in 4, three-quarters, believe that elections have never led to violence, but almost a fifth, 20%, believe that elections have led to violence in their constituencies at least once or twice, a few times or often. Even more, that 6 in 10 Ghanaians believe that parties and candidates always engage in vote buying. An insignificant, really minuscule percentage of the population claim to have, to have been threatened for their votes in the 2016 election campaign, which is very good. The numbers are so small that they don't even lend themselves to disaggregation beyond the aggregates, beyond the broad headlines. They also say that most of them have not been have never been offered money or a bribe for their vote. But the findings with respect to vote security, fair vote count, and correct vote tally announcement are not as positive, even though 7 in 10 believe that they will enjoy vote secrecy. They are confident they will enjoy vote secrecy in the upcoming election. A quarter don't think so. They believe otherwise. Again, even though 63% deem the prospect of their vote not being counted unlikely, nearly a third remain skeptical. They believe that they will vote, but the votes will not be counted correctly. And then even more, that's nearly half of the population believe that it is very or somewhat likely that the wrong vote tally would be announced. Even more troubling, a clear majority, 65% think that they will suffer, a quarter believe that they will suffer a great deal or somewhat if they voted for their preferred party, that they will suffer reprisals for their vote choice. And then between 1/5 and nearly a third see the likelihood of violence breaking out between and among the key actors in the election, between rival political parties and their supporters, between within political parties, between political parties and the security agencies, on the part of the opposition parties, and then also on the part of the incumbent parties. Then we thought it's a good proxy, there's a proxy measure of confidence levels in the Electoral Commission and the election process, just to track, to get an assessment of what the experience with the recently concluded limited voter registration exercise. And here too, we found that generally people were happy with the exercise, and gave the Electoral Commission and the security agencies and others good marks for their performance in the conduct of that election. In fact, the Electoral Commission was rated quite positively in all of this. But when I say quite positive, it's relative. If you think that 3 in 10 Ghanaians rating the EC's performance in the limited voter registration as negative, If you think that is good enough, that's fine. If you think that's not, then as I do, then there is still work for the commission to do. By and large, a majority of Ghanaians, a clear majority, perceive the Electoral Commission to be neutral in its work. But you should also note that there is a solid minority out there, 30%, that believes that the Electoral Commission is biased in favor of particular people, parties, or interests in the country. Also, a bit worrying is the trust levels, popular trust levels for the Electoral Commission. Again, just as in the perceived levels of preparedness, institutional preparedness, Ghanaians deem the army and the police more trustworthy than the Electoral Commission. Again, the Electoral Commission's trust rating is still worse or lower than that for the National Peace Council, and that it's for me a matter of concern that the Electoral Commission only outperforms the political parties, and then also, does it even outperform? No, it doesn't. It does not outperform the main opposition party. It outperforms the other opposition parties and the ruling party, and also the president. That, I think, is worrisome. That if any institution is to be trusted, it should be maybe the Electoral Commission close to the police and the military at worst, and not what we found. In general, Ghanaians are quite emphatic about the institutions that they deem most effective in resolving election conflicts at the constituency level, and that they see the police, religious authority, traditional authority, and citizen peace committees and NGOs and civil societies as quite effective in resolving conflicts at the constituency level, not at the national level or even the regional level. What the survey findings tell us is that Ghanaians are, by and large, very much law and order, law-abiding people, and that 9 in 10 say that they would obey the government in power even if they didn't vote for it. So basically, if you had all things being equal, you expect only 10% of the population to exhibit signs of civil disobedience in the event their party or candidate loses. There is also very high levels of acceptance of the police and the courts authority, which again it's a reflection of the law-abiding nature of the population. Also, the EC is recognized widely as the body that should announce election results authoritatively. That's regardless of the not so high levels of trust. They still believe that it's the right institution to do so, and not anybody, as some of the parties have been threatening to do, and the main opposition MPP has been threatening to do. Then this small matter of whether the security of the parties and candidates should be provided exclusively by state and by the state security agencies, or they can do so themselves, where a majority believes that the state authorities should do so. Now, this is an important point to note, or something to note, because unlike the rest of the public, the political parties, the main opposition MPP and the ruling party appears to place quite a lot of trust in providing their own security. And that has been some issue of contention. So it's noticeable, it's still noticeable that a quarter of the population believe that parties should not rely solely on state-provided security and that they should provide their own. So here are some of the slides depicting that. Okay. You've got to forgive me because about 4 a.m. I was trying to put this together early morning. So, all right. Then we also asked finally what people would like to see, what measures they would like put in place to ensure clean and peaceful elections, because we still found fairly high levels of concerns about election disputes and whether they will be resolved peacefully and so on. And there we thought, well, what people really were telling us is that it's so important to us that there is no political violence. It's so important to us that the army and the police are neutral. Now the question is, why are these things, people saying these things are important to them? Our suspicion is that it's a sign of anxiety. They like to see it. That's their ideal position and expectation, but it's not guaranteed. That's what they would have. So they say that they will feel a lot more secure if there were armed security personnel at the police stations. That's 8 in 10. And they also express strong support for international and domestic independent election observers to be present at the polling stations. So, some concluding remarks. I hope I've managed to convey to you that elections are a big deal to Ghanaians, and that the stakes of Ghana's 2016 elections are unusually high, and that on the face of it, there is good reason to be confident that Ghana will have credible and peaceful elections this year. That the electorate seems well prepared. Most claim to be aware of the poll process. Most claim to be registered and intend to vote. Many expect the elections to be free and fair and peaceful as well. And when you look at attitudes to election dispute resolution and dispute resolution in general, you are seeing a fairly law-abiding citizenry. And also there is significantly high levels of acceptance of the legitimacy of state law and order institutions, the courts and the police, and even the Electoral Commission and others. There's also considerable confidence that the elections will be free and fair, and but lot of concerns also about election irregularities ranging from parties and candidates breaching the law, engaging in violence, engaging in vote buying, and the like. Some concerns about vote secrecy, some concerns about the wrong vote counting and wrong tally being announced, some fears about reprisals for who they choose to cast their votes for. There's general sense that the Electoral Commission is doing works in a neutral way, but always worry about the third that thinks otherwise. Again, trust levels for the ECA as well as other institutions generally high, but worry about the fact that the ECA is trusted less than the army and the police, government and private media broadcasting houses and the like. Perhaps, maybe where I want to leave this is that when you look at the findings on its face value, generally there isn't too much to be concerned, too much to be alarmed about, though there are some areas of concern, but not overwhelmingly. I think when you dig deeper, you may think otherwise. And so the last slide I leave you with is that if you go down, you go beyond the aggregates and disaggregate down, you find that the distribution of opinions and attitudes to elections and about how to resolve election disputes and about trust in state institutions, election management body, and so on, when you do disaggregate down to regional, to party affiliation, region of respondents, ethnicity of respondent, religion of respondents, and the like, then the picture is a bit disturbing, and that it clearly shows a polarized electorate, an electorate that is polarized along party and ethno-regional lines. What it means is that reactions to the 2016 poll process, and especially its final outcomes, are likely to be highly sectarianized. And then even worse, politicians do know well that this is the case, and so they may be motivated to mobilize ethnic, regional, and sectarian sentiments in pursuit of their respective electoral goals. So I will leave you with this not so nice thought as food for thought. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for an extremely revealing survey. It seems like very much at the macro level, there's quite a lot of confidence in the electoral process and the electoral system in Ghana, but you've clearly highlighted some areas where we need to continue to invest, continue to monitor going forward. I will now turn it over to JT, who recently returned from a joint NDI-IRI pre-election assessment mission, to hear some of his comments on what they saw while in country and how those mesh with CDD-Ghana's survey.
Good afternoon. Let me first start by saying that this data is very much in line with a lot of what we saw in in-person interviews with a number of stakeholders on the ground. IRI and NDI conducted this assessment largely to look at the pre-election environment, but I think if you look at the full statement, which is now available, you'll see that we're not just looking at the pre-election environment, but over the long term. What we've seen in terms of the previous elections are very close and increasingly competitive contests that, as a result, have sort of led us to the situation we're in today, almost a perfect storm. In 2012, you had a president elected with 50.7% of the vote, avoiding a runoff, elections that were highly disputed, tied up in litigation. The Supreme Court ruling itself had a number of recommendations, and the IPAC, the Inter-Party Advisory Council, which essentially brings all the parties together, even developed a number of recommendations after the elections to come together to really try to make these elections more fair, more free, more transparent, more open. And while several of these recommendations have been put into place, still you have a very polarized environment. Now, some of this also links to the two candidates who are running. You have Akufo-Addo, who's running for his third time. We wanted to put in the statement and note that possibly his last, but we don't know. He could run again, of course. But clearly, every time you run, you get closer to the last time you run. So certainly there's a level of, within the MPP leadership, and certainly amongst its core members on the ground, that this is ours to lose, this is our time, our man has taken the backseat twice, the last time was really too close, we should have won that, we think, and we need to win this one. And that sort of at-all-cost attitude plays into this, this political environment, this highly polarized political environment. Then you have a president who took over as vice president from Atta Mills, who passed away while in office. It's not too often that we see incumbents in Africa lose their election. So, of course, President Mahama, he wants to win, and he wants to win big, and he wants to have a good mandate in his second term. But, of course, he's faced with a lot of problems. One is hardening public sentiment against his government, challenges of corruption. We're looking at youth unemployment, very, very high as a result of a devaluing currency and economic challenges that continue to dog the economy. These are all things that we saw in our discussions. I think it's important to point out, let's just talk about some of the specific issues that came down. First, increased number of youth vigilante groups. So one thing of interest to us was we were hearing about these youth vigilante groups as we went over and did this assessment. And we wanted to sort of get to the bottom of this. Now, both of the parties said they don't have youth vigilante groups. They said they don't have armed groups. They're not trained. They're not doing anything wrong. But in the MPP's case, they said, we just don't trust that the police can protect us well. And there are a few questionable examples that they put out there as ways of showing that the security services are incapable of protecting them. Of course, in our interview with a number of police leadership, they actually showed us some really good information and good data about how, in fact, they are quite prepared to deal with the electoral environment. So there's some conflict there. The MPP presidential candidate even said to us in the meeting that he thinks the groups are fine, that these youth that are protecting his rallies are there as loyal supporters. I think what made our mission very good is we had Ambassador Johnny Carson there, and he delivered a quite straightforward message, which was these youth groups can become quite dangerous in an environment, a very contested electoral environment where the outcome is uncertain or people don't have faith in the process. This can turn into a very, very difficult situation very fast. The other issue, of course, is the politicization of the media. Libel laws and sedition laws were repealed in 2001 in Ghana. Ghana has a very free and open media, and of course, neither IRI or NDI are certainly against that happening. But as a result, you have a proliferation of private media ownership in the country. Media leaders, media house owners, a number of journalists certainly all have played a role in inciting, in spreading inflammatory language, in aligning with political interests. If you think in our own country, our cable TV channels are inflammatory sometimes, or certainly take one side, you ought to tune into some of these radio stations. You would be amazed at what you hear. One famous case, of course, is the Monty 3, which is a case where a number of NDC party, essentially leaders, made some threatening statements against the Supreme Court justice. That was handled quite strongly by the court, which found them in contempt and put them in jail. Of course, after much back and forth about that, the president was asked by his own party to pardon these people. And again, basically saying the case that the court was too tough in putting them away, that basically they should be let go because they've already paid their time. They've already apologized for their crime, and as a result, they can be let free. Of course, such an action may only open the door to more people feeling like they can get away with saying the things that they want to say, which again adds to a very dangerous election environment. The disillusionment of historically marginalized groups. Ghana has a very, very low participation of women in government. I think the numbers I saw were 11%. This, of course, is shocking in a country that we hold up at times and say this is the model of democracy in Africa. This is something that needs to be addressed. When we talked with both political parties, both of them said to us, the major political parties, said to us that they both missed internal targets for women candidate recruitment. And then, of course, in the primaries themselves, the women didn't fare very well. despite the fact that both parties said that they made efforts to equal the playing field by lowering nomination fees, by providing specific resources to women. But still, we see women to really run as part of one of these two major parties. So that's another one. And then I think the other thing, of course, is the voter registration process. The mission met with the chair of the Election Commission. She is new and certainly has faced countless attacks since taking office over the conduct of the commission, not just stemming from things from the last election, but the way things are being handled in this election, particularly in regards to the voter register and its credibility. The chair has certainly been very accommodating to perhaps over-accommodating, some would note, in taking the suggestions of the opposition and really trying her best to make them work. That has led to a number of changes and a number of areas of flexibility. But as a result, she has opened herself to additional criticism of not being able to just lead on her own and move forward. Another area where the Election Commission is sort of struggling in the area of voter registration and other areas of preparation has been in the way it communicates with voters. This, of course, is a huge issue. In an environment where the media is not giving you a good opportunity to say your piece, the chair and the commission have had a hard time of getting their message out that they are actually preparing for these elections and they're actually ready. We, as a mission, were quite positive on what we saw in terms of the preparations that they've put together. In fact, they said to us, if we had elections in November, as some have wanted, we would have been ready. So having this extra month has made it even easier for us. We're ready to do this. But of course, the opposition, namely the MPP, has been very tough on the commission. And one of our messages to the opposition during our meetings was, let's stop talking about the voter register now. We have our Supreme Court ruling. We had an exhibition period. We have, this process is now over. We're now heading into the campaign season. Let's talk about issues. Because as we continue to tear down the credibility of the commission, some of which is fair, some of which is not fair, we are creating a very toxic environment where if you have these elections be as close as the last one and similar issues and problems from the last election, you really could have some real chances for violence. So that's another thing that we looked at. It's important to note that the delegation, and I'll talk about the security services again, we met with the election task force. They provided us with some great information about how they were preparing to handle these elections. I know that there's been some talk about military and police and who will watch these election stations. And again, I mentioned a little bit about the opposition's position on feeling that they're not going to be well protected. They have definitely a plan together, and they've put a lot of their resources to bear in terms of being prepared for these elections. They're also doing a great job in monitoring potential areas of flare-ups. That, in coordination with what's a number of civil society groups are doing in terms of early warning response systems that they've put together, really has put together a system that I think, and I think the delegation was quite impressed with in terms of having a handle on things. I would just say that this mission, I've been on a few of them, and this one in particular was quite interesting for me because it was not just an opportunity to go and look at an election or go look at a problem, but really to meet with a number of Ghanaians across the country who clearly have a love for democracy and have a love for peaceful elections and really want to see these elections go off without a hitch. And I do believe that that is the aim of both sides of this debate. Of course, there are a number of factors that can create a situation where this can get ugly really fast. And the mission really helped to play a role to talk to each of these stakeholders, engage them on key issues, see where we can help, not just as Americans coming with NED funding to go and talk to them, but as institutions like IRI and NDI who can bring best practices and can bring a lot of experience to bear around the continent. And I think as a result, we've been able to build some strong bridges and to really have some entry points into further assistance to to some of these matters. So anyway, I think that's it.
Thank you very much, JT. Pat, with your experience working on elections across the globe, what do you think international and domestic actors can do to ensure peaceful and credible elections in Ghana?
So I have 175 slides I'd like to show to answer that question. First, let me say, everybody that's had the pleasure of being in Ghana knows that Professor Gyimah-Boadi is referred to lovingly as Prof. Anybody who's been next to him in Stanford or any other such places know that he's earned that title no matter where he goes. So when we first met 21 years ago, thanks to a NED grant where we were doing another pre-election mission in Ghana and helping what became CODEO, the Coalition of Domestic Election Observers, I came to understand that when Prof talks, you should listen. It was about a year ago when we saw each other, and he said, I'm really concerned about what is developing in Ghana and the political circumstance surrounding the upcoming elections. There was another figure from Ghana who I've had the privilege of working with, Mr. Kofi Annan, who also said about the same time, I'm really very concerned about how things are developing in Ghana. And the need to build the capacities and the assets of Ghanaian society to intermediate the problems of this political dimension are really key. The internationals can contribute to that. They can do that in a number of ways, and that's, in effect, Chris, what you're sort of asking me to approach. The architecture for supporting peaceful and credible elections has a number of different dimensions. And I have to say that recognition is deserved here for the NED in this last year, as Congress gave strategic funding in addition to the NED, and the NED was looking at how that should be applied. The NED looked at the circumstance in Ghana, and those strategic funds were applied to help the Afrobarometer, to help also CDD's work with CODEO and doing a parallel vote tabulation in that country for technical assistance to that. And in these last two elections where things have been so close, the chair of the Election Commission, Dr. Afari-Jean, has credited the parallel vote tabulation as helping really to intermediate the problems of possible conflict and to build public confidence in the outcome. And indeed, the present Election Commission chair, who is new, has singled out the role of CDD-Ghana and CODEO in providing the parallel vote tabulation as a check on the system that helps to build confidence and to help reduce the volatility in the circumstance. And again, the NED responded to the need for extra assistance, as you did with the Afrobarometer, and made funding available for NDI and IRI to have these joint missions, which puts our organizations, which we integrated our delegation, which I did not join. I was in Zambia for the elections in Zambia at the time. But not only were there Americans, but there were Nigerians and people from other countries who are involved in giving an international face to this. The international community has, in part as a response to the call that Professor Gyimah and Kofi Annan and people like, see, Ambassador Lyman and Ambassador Johnny Carson have raised over at USIP about this. As a consequence, ECOWAS, the European Union, the African Union have all upped the attention that they're paying to this. Mr. Chambas, the special representative of the UN Secretary General, is spending much more time in the country. Around Kofi Annan and the Kofi Annan Foundation, coming out of the 2007-2008 disaster in Kenya's elections, was a commission that studied the role of elections in promoting democracy, elections, and security. And from that is an initiative, the Electoral Integrity Initiative, that in part, again, the NED helps to support the participation of a few of us in that initiative. It focuses on countries like Ghana that come into a place where there's a potential for unexpected circumstances to create instability and try to mobilize the resources of the international community to help to not intervene, but to help to complement the activities that are going on. So I would say when you look at the circumstances probably summarized best in Prof's last couple of slides, where you see that there's been, an evenly divided public support for political contenders in a country, in this case, two main political parties, two very close, razor close last elections that's led to an extreme political polarization in the country. One of the parties' attacks on the role of the Supreme Court in that last election, on the credibility of the Electoral Commission in that last election, imperfect as they may be, when it becomes a political strategy to destabilize public confidence, diminish public confidence in those key intermediary institutions, when you see a diminished role of civil society because of the kinds of accusations that are being made of them, because they said an election was credible, therefore they must somehow have taken sides politically. Even not just the attacks that have gone to CDD and Codeo in this respect, but even the role of the National Peace Coalition, it has led to a diminished capacity to deal with what are increasing tensions in the country. The voter registry controversy illustrated that, I think, very well. Everybody who came to this event knows about all those things. I really won't talk about it, but it is an important indicator. And then you look at the assets that are there. I mean, first, the rule of law institutions in the country are institutionalized over a period of time. The respect for rule of law that the survey showed, the role of the Election Commission in 6 successive elections that have been not without problems, but have been successful by world standards. As you look at them, the ability to help reignite the kind of trust that might be there. I think the new chair of the Election Commission may have had some trouble finding her sea legs, so to speak. I certainly would agree with those who said that in those first few months of her term of office, there was not enough engagement, there was not enough inclusion, there was not enough transparency, which over the last period of time seems to be corrected to a fair degree, and we'll see how this plays out going forward. The role of the security forces in the country, setting up the joint commissions to look at electoral security and to tap civil society, and the role of civil society in the peace-building communities, all, I think, have added a lot over the course of, since my last visit in June, when I was there for CDD's annual lecture. It seems to me there has been some improved conditions, and I think we should give credit first to Ghanaians in all of this for what they've done. And second, that those of us from the outside that have tried to give our support is not insignificant in the circumstance. So I'm mindful of the fact that the star is sitting next to me, and that it's not a good idea to put a cloud between the audience and the star. So on occasion, I say that I'll only speak briefly, and once in a while, I actually hold true to it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat. Before opening up to the floor for questions, I would just like to ask Prof. one question, and that is, one figure that really stood out to me was a drastic increase in public confidence in the upcoming elections in comparison to sort of a retrospective assessment of the 2012 elections. What do you think is driving that increase in confidence?
It's got something to do with the timing of the 2014 Afrobarometer survey. The election petition process was the first 8 months of 2013. And so asking those questions to respondents in the field at that time, the noise of the election petition or the controversies and the bad light in which the Electoral Commission had been shown was a big factor on the minds. And I think over time, time is being much kinder to the commission. But you should also keep in mind that it's very easy for people to, if the electoral commission commits a big blunder, people will quickly go back to the experience in 2013 and said, why did we, we've always known they are problematic. So I kind of, and I think it's a good time. I agree generally with the assessment of the electoral commission from the team that went to observe them from IRI and NDI. But I also think it's, at least listening to it, it sounds to me to be a lot more Panglossian than I would ever have thought. So there's a debate there to be had.
Thank you very much. We will now open it up for questions from the floor. And could you please just state your name and affiliation before asking your question? Ni?
Thank you very much. My name is Ni Akwete. For today, my most important affiliation is I'm a Ghanaian. And I want to welcome Prof as an old friend, Akwaba, to Washington. My question also has to do with the Electoral Commission. Ghana does have that exalted image about democracy in Africa. And I dare say part of it had to do with the work that Professor Afarijan did. And he's been, kudoed all over. So I'm surprised at the attacks on the new Electoral Commission when she hasn't even done anything yet. So where is that coming from? What is she being blamed for? Thank you.
Well, I hope it's a collective response that you are expecting. For my part, again, I share all the praise. I agree, and I share, and I praise the Electoral Commission of Ghana, Dr. Afrejan in particular, my former professor in college. But I think that in the course of the election petition process, the commission's warts and all were laid bare, and some of them were not pretty. And so many of us began to quickly reassess what we had felt about them. That's one. Secondly, I think over time, the commission became over-complacent, and that it spent too little time on Ghana's elections and far more time on everybody else's elections, partly also for the perverse reasons that the more their fame grew, they also came to earn a lot of per diem for running other people's elections. So consequently, they attended to Ghana's elections quite late and rushed through with constitutional instruments and legislative instruments, always in the last 5 months to an election. And one of the things that nearly derailed this past election was creating new constituencies 5 months or so to, actually 4 months to the election, and all the dislocations with court litigations, Supreme Court litigations. There's also, I think, an institutionalized, I get a sense of institutionalized corruption there. First, and again, it's not corruption in a grand way, but more in the procurement mode. Why the commission chose to have its own biometric card at the time when there is a national ID card, which is also supposed to be biometric, and there's a health insurance card that is supposed to be biometric. There are so many biometric cards in circulation, and they don't speak to each other. And yet, some of these cards are used as proof, were to be used eventually as proof of citizenship for purposes of voting as to register, and the downstream problems that is created. There was something else that they did in 2012 that greatly disturbed me. So there's, in 2006, Ghana passed a law that says that Ghanaians abroad are entitled to vote in Ghanaian elections, at least presidential elections. The Electoral Commission decides in 2012 that the law was 2006. It doesn't apply the law in 2008. It doesn't apply it in 2012. But in the case of 2012, the commission found itself out to all capitals, many capitals around the globe, to go and register the few official Ghanaians there. In the end, they came back with only 750 registrants for all that effort and carbon emission loss. So there are just a few ticks here and there. Now about the current commission, I think that given what was said and what was heard in the election petition hearing, it was a lost opportunity for the president to have appointed the new commissioner without consulting outside of the government and outside of the Council of State. It's a problem, particularly that it chose to pull somebody who had a constitutionally tenured position. It, as head of the National Commission on Civic Education, made this lateral transfer of this individual to the Electoral Commission and left the other commission vacant even to date. It created the impression of picking this person for a reason other than just running elections or promoting democracy in Ghana. That failure to consult started the new commissioner or badly off, because then it had a steep hill to climb to prove she had a huge hill to climb to prove her credibility. Third is the first 3 months, and I think John said that in his remarks, that the actions were the worst that anybody in a new institution, heading a new institution, could undertake in the circumstances of her appointment. And this is where my disagreement comes again, that when I look at the way she's gone about her work, one, she's not inherently consultative. And she tends also to have an attitude of my way or the highway. And that those of us in civil society and others who work with the commission have to walk on eggshells around her all the time, because we are being threatened with delisting if we are perceived by her to be difficult.
So let me join in. I wasn't with this delegation, but I've been twice and spent a full day with her in the commission in January with Professor Jega from Nigeria's former election commissioner. I would agree with what Prof has said, and without going into a deconstruction of the history of the prior election commission, in 2013, it seemed to me that it always seems to me, and many of you have heard me say this before, to guide yourself when it comes to democratic governance, and in particular to elections, three principles really have to be kept in mind at all times. And the first one is inclusion. No matter what the topic or question is, inclusion really has to guide you. Transparency really has to be present. And accountability really has to be acknowledged and respected and created. And in the circumstance in the last election, it seemed to me that, Dr. Afrobarometer, who has contributed a lot, not just in Ghana, but around the world, Dr. Afrobarometer was not as inclusive as he had previously been in the kinds of decisions that were being made. And there was a vulnerability to the kinds of criticisms that came as a consequence of shortcomings that are in any process. I mean, I wasn't there to judge the magnitude of the shortcomings, but, that's just almost a platitude. And that left the Election Commission in a much more vulnerable state, even though the vote count was done properly. And I have no question whatsoever in the vote count. The CDD-Ghane's parallel vote tabulation was expertly done and verified the credibility of the result. But the vote count sits in a context, right? The context has to do with what happened on election day and what happened in the period before and after the election. And if we were talking about Zambia right now, we would have a very lively conversation about that. And so I think what my criticism of the Election Commission leading up to that was that they were not as inclusive, they were not as transparent, and there was not as much accountability, a consequence of diminished public trust, that when the election was so close, left them vulnerable to the accusations of those who didn't like the outcome. And that was a bit of a disservice. I mean, I'm being polite in saying a bit of a disservice. When a president has the power to appoint, even if that power is unilateral, especially when it comes to elections, these three principles apply. Inclusivity. You don't have to be required constitutionally to consult the various political parties that are involved or civil society, but wisdom in government would lead you to do that. And when you bring someone forward to be the chair or to be a member of an election commission, you want that commission to start off with public confidence. So it should have been done in a consultative way, a transparent way, and it wasn't done in this case. When you inherit a job, whether you really wanted it or you were drafted for it or not, and you realize that what's taking place, you have a very, very heavy task to conduct a technical exercise, an election, that is unparalleled, except for military operations for a country. You have a very heavy technical exercise to lead, but you can't lead it without public confidence. People have to believe that what you did was right. And I do think that the chair of the Election Commission, not based on what I think of her personally, but based on what I saw of the work, there was not inclusion, there was not consultation. The Inter-Party Consult Advisory Committee was not activated fully, and there were many things that were not done. The controversy over the voter registry could have been put to rest simply by making an electronic copy of the voter registry publicly available in a machine-readable format, and any political party and any civil society organization, including CDD-Ghana, which has the capacity to do the statistical analysis, could have come forward and said, this is not a problematic registry, or there are problems, and here are the magnitudes and types of problems, with plenty of time for those to be fixed. That's been done all over the world. That was not done in Ghana, even though there was a lot of advice to do that. There are other ways to approach it. If you didn't want to hand it over that way, you could have brought in outside independent consultants that everyone agreed are credible and let them do the analysis and make their findings available. So the problem of the voter registry in Ghana, which dragged on until very, very recently, and really, as you know better than me, kept the public from debating the economic, social, educational, health issues that are really what an election should focus on, was focused on, nonetheless, the controversy around the election, electoral registry. So that could have been put to debate. Did the opposition go about this in a way that was created more animosity than was needed? I'll let that for others to judge, but it seemed to me that my advice to the opposition, and when I was there both times, met with leaders from both the ruling party and the opposition party, as well as civil. So my advice was, move on. There are substantive issues to address. Prepare yourself to safeguard, and there's 6 or 8 ways to safeguard an election based on even bad voter registry, but move beyond it. So I think, in a way, the Election Commission did not, in its opening days, do what it needed to do. Even through June, in my last visit, they did appoint a public liaison person who seems to be being more proactive. Until that point, the biggest defender of the Election Commission's actions was the government itself, which is not really a position you want to be in. But the way to do that is to be proactive and to have a public relations campaign. So I've not been there, recently. I don't want to say too much more than that. But when you're in a deficit of public confidence, winning that public confidence is best done by being inclusive, being transparent, and making yourself openly accountable. And that would, was my advice to every election commissioner I've ever met, including the source, Dr. Orson.
JT, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add, maybe talk a little bit about our meeting, because I would say that we met with the Election Commission near the end of the assessment. We did it on purpose because we wanted to sort of get all the sides together, get all the information together, and we were really looking forward to this meeting, almost expecting it to be something a little adversarial because of what we had heard, but also really, well, there was some stories that had come out in the media during our visit, like Kufuor made some statement about the Election Commission and a few others. So we thought by the time we got to the chair, she would not be, very open. But we actually found the opposite. She sat down. We had, we had Ambassador Carson. We had a number of election experts, as Pat has talked about, from North America and Africa. And she was very open and consultative and really engaging on ways that she could do a better job. I felt that she took the meeting as an opportunity to really learn from us as much as we were learning from her. She wanted to hear things about some of the challenges of voter registration experienced in places like Nigeria, or dealing with issues of election dispute, or working with political parties. Clearly, one of the challenges that she has and that the Commission has overall is one that a lot of commissions have, which is messaging, saying it the right way, dealing with getting the facts out as they are, and really having a debate. I think also sometimes you have a situation where election commissioners look at their job simply as a technical position. Often we heard the word, well, this is part of law, so this is the law, so I'm just enforcing the law. But our message back was, well, you're not just enforcing the law. You're not just a technical person. You're also a public figure. And the keynote there is that you have to really do a better job of connecting. I mean, in a place where I've worked in Kenya, this is a huge problem, and we know the IEBC, that whole commission has been turned over for similar reasons of confidence, corruption, and other accusations. So I think that's a huge problem. The other thing that really stood out that we didn't talk too much about, but clearly is a problem, is the issue of funding. The budgets that have been put forward are certainly not being met by any measure. The Commission is under-resourced on a number of fronts. They're also slow bureaucratically, and certainly are struggling in the areas of just now getting around to procuring the electronic results transmission system that they're hoping to put up. Of course, that also puts into question some of the other issues, which is adopting new technology right before an election, very close to an election. And is that something they should be doing now, or is it something they should endeavor to do over time? The new commissioner, the new chair, she has a lot of work in front of her, and it's not the easiest job. And certainly, one of the things that NDC does is they agree with just about everything she does, which just makes it worse in terms of perception. So she, I think, is really looking for advice. She's looking to engage. We did remind her of our meetings with civil society and the need to really partner with them and use them as advocates and work with them to help get the word out and help engage on certain parts of this process. So I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag, and that was sort of what we saw out of this. Certainly there's work to be done, but we felt, clearly there was someone who had the will and really the right mind to really try to push forward, given the environment, to do the best that she could with what she had.
Thank you. Other questions? Sure, I think we can take a couple together. So, go.
Thank you very much. My name is Muiba Mwenda. I'm a Mandela Washington Fellow, but for today my correct affiliation will be that of a Zambian. Prof did mention in his presentation that it has become common for post-regime vindictiveness, and to that I'll add that actually even for those who are in government, they have also become hostile to those who are in the opposition. That is the African scenario. And this has made politics in Africa to be a matter of life and death. For the faint-hearted, it is something that they are considering to be a dirty game, and they don't want to go anywhere near. We have seen this in my own country, Zambia. We have seen this in Kenya. We are likely to see this in Zimbabwe. We are likely to see it in many more African countries. So the representatives from NDI and IRI, what do you think can be the best intervention measure that can be put in place so that we don't make politics a matter of life and death, we don't make it a dead game, and that we can actually be all committed to creating a conducive environment where competing ideas will fill the political space? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Priscilla Japon from Center for Global Development. My question is to the entire panel, so whoever would want to answer. Last year in October, the opposition candidate Akufo-Addo was in Washington making rounds to various think tanks, and he was at CGD. And one of the, was more of a round table, it was a public. And one of the concerns they raised, or their reason for harping so much on the voter registry issue, was they felt that because of the scandals that had plagued the judiciary system, and because of how the election petition trial had gone, they felt that in this coming election, if there's any dispute, there aren't any institutions that they trust to seek redress from. And maybe it was a bit of fear mongering to some degree, but they felt that since they didn't trust existing institutions, and since other Ghanaians didn't trust existing institutions, the possibility for violence or an undesirable situation outcome was quite high in this election cycle. So what do you perceive, or what do you think of that outlook? And what do you think can be done to ensure that both the opposition party and Ghanaians trust the courts and the EC to resolve issues in a neutral and impartial manner, should the elections be a close call once again?
Thank you. My name is Kwabena. I'm from Ghana. My question goes to Professor Gyimah-Boadi. Prof, do you think that the Inter-Party Advisory Committee is still relevant, considering the fact that decisions are made at IPAC and then parties will come out and supposedly say, well, those decisions were made or we didn't agree to that? Also, IPAC is not really legal, so it can be contested. I know the electoral reform, one of the electoral reforms is to get civil society involved in IPAC. But the political parties and civil society don't really represent the people, and they always go in for their interests. So making it a bigger organization, bigger group, which advises the EC, will they really seek the interest of the people, the electorates, and not their own interest? Thank you.
Prof, would you like to start with the last question?
So first to start with the question about IPAC's relevance and effectiveness. Well, it has been highly relevant and quite effective in the past. But we are in a more compared, in a different era. I think everything after the 2012 elections and the election petition process is different from what prevailed before. So there is an effectiveness challenge now that maybe IPAC didn't have. One of the many recommendations that has been made is that because it's so common for the parties to go into IPAC meetings and agree on things and then come out and play to the gallery about whether they agreed or not, we had always suggested that it's civil society and the moral leadership of the country, the religious leaders who carry a lot of respect, should be invited should be allowed to sit in IPAC meetings not as voting members, but as observers, so that agreements reach the, to be so difficult, it will not be easy for agreements to be, that are reached there to be thrown out of the window once these parties come out. Dr. Aferijan did allow some of us CSOs entry to IPAC meetings, including CDD. Again, and this is part of my concern with the current commissioner, she's thrown that out of the current constitutional instruments governing elections. So we don't have that. Instead, she cherry picks. If she says she likes your face, she may invite you. We are still lobbying and advocating that they get us back, because without us, this tendency for the parties to say one thing in those meetings, come out and say another, will continue. Failure to accede to that, to concede to this fairly innocuous request, is part of my worry with the Commission and its willingness to be transparent and inclusive. On the question about the fear that election disputes may be settled out of court, it is still possible sometimes to, I kind of think, well, the Electoral Commission has been saying this as a mantra, that elections are won at the polling stations, not in the courts. This is even after the election. In fact, that was what the courts, the Supreme Court said that many times in the court of the proceedings. The Electoral Commission, since the Supreme Court process, has also been repeating that mantra. Some of us were very happy when about 6 weeks ago, the National Chief Imam called out the Electoral Commission and said, it's irresponsible for you to be saying this because you are encouraging the parties to do the wrong thing in the event. If I can get the slide back, I just wanted to show you a slide about the relative recovery of trust of some of these key popular trust in these key institutions, and that the Electoral Commission's trust levels have risen by 14 percentage points between 2014 and 2016. And then over time, altogether, it has risen by only 2 percentage points from 2002 to date. And it's the weakest and the lowest recovery rate in popular trust ratings. So, okay, what do I do to get it back? Okay, all right. But I'll continue to speak to that. Now, the courts of law, too, but so in 2014, trust levels for the courts of law stood at 42%. In 2016, it's recovered to 55%. So yeah, it's recovering, but it's not what it was, say, in 2005. Perhaps it's a good thing that trust in, at least in terms of this election, it's a good thing that trust in the ruling party and trust in the presidency also have experienced only very weak levels of recovery. So it means the courts will be relied upon more, and maybe the Electoral Commission will be relied upon more, and that's a good thing. For the comment about post-regime accountability as a positive thing versus post-regime vindictiveness and persecution as a negative thing, I agree with you with the dilemma that it poses. There has to be accountability, whether in regime or out of regime. The problem is that fear of being held accountable can also, once out of power, has also been a factor that makes incumbents highly, highly unwilling to leave office. I think that we have to collectively begin to engage how to tackle this dilemma, because there are many instances where a transitional justice arrangement or concept is a better way to allow the society to move on. And there are also ways in which that breeds impunity. But I think it's a debate that is worth having, and the right policy lessons learned from that.
Pat and JT, would you also like to follow up on the question of lowering the political stakes?
One of the ways to talk about this is winner-take-all politics. And it's not just true on the continent, it's true around the world, where there's an overconcentration of powers in the executive, and there is an overconcentration of powers in the national level of government. And so, you know, in this country, we talk often about checks and balances, whether checks and balances have to do between the branches of government, and even, of course, within the legislature, there's checks and balances within each of the houses and between the houses. It diffuses power. But there is also the diffusion of power from the national to intermediary levels of government to local governance. Kenya, I think, attacked this in a very interesting and constructive way, which JT knows better than I. But over a long period of time, with an inclusive process that led to constitutional reforms, you know, a referendum in which the public really was educated, knowing what decision it was making, the pros and cons, and setting up a reconfiguration of the powers of government that transpired after the last election. And I think so. All of us that have been looking at this try to think about how we can address the winner-take-all politics. That is a very important element of it, and that has to do with governance structures. It has also to do with what Prof just mentioned, accountability. That is, if you have a government where things have been concentrated and power has been abused, you have coming with it impunity. And with impunity comes an over-abuse of power to relatively large dimensions, whether we're talking whatever continent we're talking about around the world. And then that means if you come out of power, you're worried about going to jail, or, you know, whether it's in your own country or the International Criminal Court. And so the question of transitional justice has to be addressed. And I think that really has to be has to be more contextualized than what I just said. I mean, all of this has to be contextualized. What works in Zambia is not necessarily going to work in Ghana going forward, and every country is somewhere else along that spectrum. But I do think that's very important. And in a way, not to keep harping on my principles, 3 principles, but that has to do with inclusion, right? So you're including people in the political process, giving them stakes, and then transparency and accountability tend to flow with public trust as a consequence. The IPAC, I just say I agree with Prof. IPACs existing not just at national levels, but being able to replicate them at intermediate levels and local levels, as was done again in Kenya and has been done in other countries. Nigeria, exactly, has been very important to mitigate the potentials for violence and increase the communication patterns between and among the political competitors and civil society. And in that case, bringing more people into the room, I think is really very important. I mean, you know, in terms of theories of change, we're talking about elite behaviors and so on, but nonetheless, where you have circumstances like the National Peace Council or CODEO or other organizations in a country that can have a direct influence on political actors, and where they have structures like the Peace Council through the churches, et cetera, that can be replicated at lower levels, there are ways then of having more accountability. It's not just the Election Commission saying to the parties the same thing at the same time, and those parties agreeing. In Ghana, the chair says, they're very nice meetings, but when they go out, they then repolarize. And in fact, in Zambia, you hear exactly the same thing. So by having civil society present, which we're seeing around the world, that is a better practice. And then on the question about the courts or the streets, it's a very difficult issue. You know, I mean, part of what happens in politics, and you know, it's not just in other countries. We hear it today in this country. If you think you might lose, you start trying to delegitimize the victory of your opponent and the institutions that are responsible for dealing with the process. And when that becomes a political tool, that means what you're really looking at is how to attain your political ends by something other than peaceful processes and means. It's a threat of violence. It's a threat of causing of instability as a means to achieve your goal. That's the kind of thing where civil society needs to be mobilized, rule of law institutions and international pressures that can be brought to bear need to be mobilized to try to put, an end to that. At the same time, you can be in an unjust circumstance. If you were in Zimbabwe in 2008 facing the second round of the election, it was an unjust circumstance. The courts were not going to give you a remedy to the violence and the killings that were taking place. So it's a very, again, I don't want to say everything is about context, but what really there needs to be is a drive towards reinforcing those elements of society that mediate potentials for violence and strengthening institutional processes and inclusion so that people have a stake in the process and stay with it.
Yeah, so the problem with going after Pat and Prof is I don't have much to add. But I'll say this, that the issue of corruption continues to be a huge driver of the win at all costs. The other side is eating, it's my time to eat. I think in Nigeria they call it stomach infrastructure. And you are running for an election to get your share, to get your time. And we've seen this in Kenya, which is fueled under tribal politics, where tribal coalitions have said, these Kikuyus or these Kalenjins or whoever, they're eating now, it's our time. We want to get in there. We need to have our opportunity to be in government, to put our people where they need to be. And part of this is about diffusing the influence of concentrated power. And, in Ghana's case, I mean, just looking at the simple example of the way that the election commission chair is appointed by the president, that's a need for reform. And having that reform put in place where more people are part of that process will, again, add to the ability to people feel like, well, if I don't win, at least I know that the process is fair. And I think that comes through time and again in the elections that we see on the continent, particularly in Kenya, where I've seen, having been there from about 2010 off and on till about last year, just to see how the country's political system has transformed because of devolved government, because of taking all of this concentrated power and transferring authority, not decentralization where you're just sort of creating offices in local areas, but literally transferring administrative, financial, political power to a local level. You take a lot of wind out of the top of the system, and you allow people to really compete on ideas, compete on policies. And these are things that we don't often see in election campaigns, even in our own country, right? And in Ghana, that's why part of our message was, hey, listen, this election commission, you have some issues, the opposition. Yes, it's fine, let's stay on top of those issues. But we have an election campaign. Let's talk about issues. Let's start engaging people so that they're not just voting on personalities or the best of the worst or, perhaps someone that you identify with more because of your ethnic makeup or otherwise, religion, but really because of the ideas that you put forward. And institutions like IRI and NDI work around the world to try to promote that, to try to push issue-based campaigns so that they're more engaged. I think the issue about IPAC, there's obviously a lot of examples on the continent. I mean, I'm most familiar with Nigeria's example. The big problem in Nigeria with bringing it down to the local level is you don't have resources. You have state-level IPACs, but they have no money. They have no office. They have no authority. They sit around and they talk, but they really have a hard time to really convene themselves. And they actually rely on institutions like ours to actually convene these meetings. NDI does a great job in Kenya convening youth at that level on a political party, inter-party level. So it's, if we're going to create bodies like this, there has to be some funding and resources to really make them effective. One of the recommendations that we made coming out of the assessment was that to deal with some of this, where they make a decision in the meeting and they're all very happy, and then they walk out to the press and say something completely different, is to really encourage IPAC and encourage the commission to make as transparent as possible, the minutes of those meetings, the decisions that are being made, publish them, make them open, so that everyone sees, so it gets to the public as soon as possible, that these decisions were made. Because too often in Ghana, they make these decisions in these meetings, and they're not necessarily defended in public afterwards. Instead, they turn around on the commissioner and they say, you see what she said? We don't believe in that. You know, one of the arguments that we heard from MPP was, the NDC has created all of these other political parties to stack IPAC against them. Whether true or not, it certainly isn't helpful for the discourse. One way to deal with that, make the meetings more open, more transparent, get more information in the hands of citizens, let them decide.
Thank you very much all for your responses. We're just about out of time, so I wanted to give all of our panelists about 30 seconds if they have any one thing that they would like to reemphasize as we move forward towards the elections.
Well, just to emphasize what I said at the end, that there is definitely on the surface a lot of reasons to be hopeful for peaceful and credible elections in Ghana. But I urge all of us not to take things at surface value, dig a little bit deep, and also explore a little bit further the little wrinkles that we spot, a little challenges that we spot, and dig a little bit more and confirm that indeed there's no cause for alarm before we conclude so.
I'll just echo what Prof said earlier. I think let's not overemphasize the peaceful part of peaceful and credible. And let's look for the need for credibility, and not just in elections, the need for credibility in the broader political processes. Because if we don't address that, then we will be looking for destabilized government in whatever part of the world we happen to be.
There's election day, and then there's after election day. As Ghanaians go into this election, there is hope that this will be a peaceful election. But of course, the challenges are there. I think our assessment mission helped to bring some key discussions forward on a number of fronts, and I think as a result, people are able to hear a little bit more from organizations like IRAN and NDI about the expertise that we have and the experiences we have around the continent to sort of inform further dialogue on a number of issues in the country. Ghanaians are proud of their democracy. They're proud of having very peaceful transfers of power, elections that have been contested, but done so through rule of law and democratic processes, and not through the streets, not through violence, not with youth militia, but done again through a democratic process. And that's why we look at Ghana, and that's why we value their transitions, and we value the commitment that they've made over time. There's no reason to doubt that that won't happen again, but we as members of the international community and friends of Ghana, supporters of Ghana, certainly want to make sure that we can help in any way we can to prevent any possibility of Ghana getting off the track. So, good luck.
I would like to offer a warm word of thanks and gratitude to our panelists for their thoughtful presentations and for our audience for their insightful questions. Thank you very much.